Greetings, all. This is Rick Levine with your January mid-month update. This mid-month update normally goes out to my Patreon subscribers at the $3 a month level of subscription. That is the solar tier on Patreon. But a few times a year, I send this out to everybody just as a way of letting other people know who don't normally get the mid-month update what I'm up to and what's going on for the second part of the month, where we drill down a little bit deeper than we do in the monthly forecasts. I'm recording this on the afternoon of January 15th. I'm recording it in England, which this is early in the morning on the in the United States on the 15th. And before I jump into the daily, what's going on day by day for the last part of January, there are a few things I'd like to share with you. If you're not interested in these things, just scroll on ahead. But I do have a couple of things that I'd like to bring to your attention. There's actually four things. I'm going to tell you what they are, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about them, and then we're going to get into the forecast. I just want to let people know that I will be at Soul Food Coffee House in Redmond, Washington on the evening of February 6th for the astrology night. We've not held them for a few months because I've been out of town. This is a live streamed event. And more information on this and each of the events that I'll be talking about will be in the pinned comment in the first comment below, and you can find out more information by going there. I'll be at Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles at the LAX Hilton, and that is on the 20th through the 23rd of February. And this is a huge event, and I'll be in particular participating in a symposium, an astrology symposium on Monday afternoon. I'll tell you more about that in just a moment. The following week, I will be just north of Santa Barbara in Buellton, doing a 6-day journey into astrology using your own birth chart. And this is a 6 days of how to read a birth chart using your own birth charts. More on that in just a minute. And then the last event I want to mention here, and I'm going to tell you a bit more about it right now. And in some ways, this is a very exciting event that'll take a little bit of planning on your part. But this is the Mystery School at Sea, and this is a 10-day voyage through the Greek islands and Turkey. This will be departing on March 20th from Athens, Greece. And I'd like to invite those of you who are interested on a journey of discovery that will be a once-in-a-lifetime journey. I mean, this 10-day voyage is going to go through a very important part of the world that had a huge amount of import in what we do in these modern times, both from an astrological standpoint and also just from understanding who we are as humans and what's going on the planet today. There'll be 12 other teachers that'll be joining me in my workshops. And we're going to visit some places like the island of Crete, which is the home to Gnosis and the Labyrinth and the early Minoan mystery traditions, and the island of Helios and the Colossus. We'll stop in Thessaloniki, which was a very important melting pot for the old esoteric Christianity and the mystery rites that came together there. And then in Ephesus, Turkey, where early Christian mystics united with the great mother tradition, Artemis. And then we're going to stop in Kavala, where Paul first preached in Europe. So this is an incredibly exciting week. There'll be teachers of all different types of traditions, revisioning ancient histories and where we fit in the not only on Earth but in the galaxy. There'll be people who will be talking a lot about a variety of ET relationships and events, and also just the alternative histories. I'll be personally presenting three talks on the 10-day program, including astrology and the new consciousness. And then I'm doing a talk that's just an astrological update on where we are in 2026, kind of in the big picture of scheme, the big picture of things, the big scheme of things, I guess. And then I'll be doing a talk on astrology, reincarnation, ET, and ascension. And my talks are just part of what really is going to be quite an extraordinary week. And if you'd like to join some like-minded souls seeking knowledge beyond the ordinary, beyond the mundane, all you need to do is go to mysteryschool@sea.com, and I'm looking forward to sharing the beauty of the Mediterranean waters and the ancient Greek islands with you. That will be March 20th through March 30th, sailing from Athens, Greece. Now, backtracking just a little bit, I already mentioned Conscious Life Expo, but the thing that I will be participating will be on Monday, February 23rd at 3 to 7 p.m. The expo runs all weekend, and you do not need to attend the expo in order to come to this particular event. The event will be moderated by Shima Moore, who is one of the co-founders of Conscious Life Expo. Now, I think in its 24th year, if I'm not mistaken. It's a huge event. It's a fantastic weekend. It's an amazing collection of people and teachers and participants. It's just a really powerful, profound weekend. But this particular panel that runs from 3 to 7 on Monday, 3 to 7 p.m. on Monday, moderated by Shima Moore, will include a few other astrologers, and a couple of whom I've worked with before. Leo King, David Palmer will be on the panel with me. Cassandra Joan Butler, another really competent, amazing astrologer, and Clarice Chan, Master Clarice Chan from Singapore, practices a slightly different type of astrology than some of us do here in the West, but a very important way of looking at things. This is going to be the Cosmic Evolution Symposium, and it's going to be 2026 through 2028 planetary shifts and how these planetary shifts are catalysts of transformation. Then the following weekend, actually starting on the following weekend on Friday evening, February 27th, but this will run all week through Thursday, March 5th. I'll be leading a 6-day journey into astrology, but very specifically using your own chart as the curriculum for you for the week. All participants will have their charts calculated by me in advance, and you will have material that will unfold during the week as to how to dig into the chart. If you have charts of other people, close family members or relationships or children or parents that you want to bring and use, this is a perfect opportunity for that also. This 6-day journey into astrology on how to read a birth chart is going to be at the Red Tail Studio in Buellton, California. Now, Buellton is just on the 101, just north of Santa Barbara. It's an amazing facility. I've taught there before. There's information at the website, and the link is below, but this is being sponsored by Heaven and Earth Workshops, the same people that sponsor and produce my workshops in Bali and India and in Mexico. There'll be food every day. There'll be the facilities for lodging are listed on the website. But basically, this is for anyone who wants to take their approach to a birth chart to the next level so that you have some clarity, some confidence, some insight. It may be that you read astrology, that you look at charts, but you don't quite know where to go with them or how to work with them. Maybe you feel like astrology is still a foreign language. This is basically a course that will blend the ancient wisdom of astrology with practical application, empowering you to use astrology in your daily life. And so it really doesn't matter what your skill level is here. What we'll do through the week is we'll go through the absolute building blocks of natal chart interpretation, including planet signs, houses, aspects, and how to identify themes and patterns and potentials that make each and every chart unique. This actually is my 15th retreat that has been produced by Heaven and Earth Workshops. And I'm thrilled to be returning to Santa Ynez Valley. It's a beautiful part of California. And I'm looking forward to seeing some of you join us. We still have some room. This will be a limited event. It will be a small group in the range of 15 to 20 people at the most. And so there'll be a lot of individual attention through the week. And if you want to, in effect, get your chart done, this is a time to do it because we will be using the charts of all participants throughout the work during the week. And that's heavenandearthworkshops.com. And then, of course, the last event is Back to the Mystery School at Sea, which I've already talked about. There's a number of other things coming up that are listed in the comments down below, in the first comment down below. But let's get on with the month ahead, which is, well, I should say the second part of the month ahead, which is already unfolding and unfolding in ways, I wanted to say, unfolding in ways that no one could have possibly imagined the first month of 2026. But the fact of the matter is that if you go back and listen to my January forecast that I recorded on December 30th of 2025, we are unfolding January exactly according to schedule. And before I get into the specifics of the astrology charts day by day, which we will do, what I want to say is that there's right now a lot of things going on the planet. If I gave a laundry list right now, I wouldn't touch some of the most important things only because the laundry list is quite long. I don't know that on January 1st that anyone was quite prepared for the United States' invasion of Venezuela and a kidnapping or capturing of the president of Venezuela and how that shifts the global political situation. I'm not sure that anyone was ready or prepared for, excuse me, for what seems to be unfolding with the hiding of the information that is contained in the Epstein files, and that as a tip of an iceberg to stuff that seems to just, get worse and worse day by day and week by week. I'm not sure that anyone was prepared for the level of the intensity of public outcry on the streets of Iran and what the response would be or might be to that. And that is something that is in motion right now. I'm not sure that anyone was ready or prepared for a murder of a civilian by ICE in the United States in Minneapolis, and a second shooting now, and just the fear that is being stirred up, that is aimed in some ways almost like a bully at kind of making people feel really afraid of what's going on, afraid of their neighbors, afraid of the authorities coming to get them. All of this is feeding into, I think, something which is very, very important. And again, I'm not surprised. I'm surprised by every individual event, but I'm not surprised that it's unfolding. I'm not surprised at the speed of which it's unfolding, because as I said in the January forecast, by the end of January, we will be living in a different world. And and that seems to be unfolding according to that idea. I mean, with the United States, with Europe committing armed forces to defend Greenland against an invasion by the United States. I mean, all these things are just not quite the way many of us thought that the 21st century would unfold. Now, having said that, I would like to extend my heartfelt um, uh, sympathy, empathy, acknowledgement of those people who are suffering wherever they may be on the planet, whether they are suffering at the hands of fires or floods or bombs or arbitrary violence or military violence, whether they're suffering at the hands of those people that are trying to suppress them or keep them quiet. I mean, there's a variety of things going on, and there is a lot of difficult energy, and because of social media, because of the instantaneous feedback of of the global media, of the internet, of digital communication, I think that we are more aware of these things around the world than we ever have been as they unfolded in the past. If we just go back 150 years ago, if these events happening around the world were unfolding, we wouldn't find out about them until sometime days, weeks, sometimes days, weeks, even months later. But now the information is simply instantaneous. And we are at an inflection point. I know astrologers always say next month is going to be the most important month, next year, this is it. I mean, it always is aimed at now because now is really all we have. Having said that, I've been saying for years, as many other astrologers have also, that the events of 2020 are feeding into what is unfolding through 2025 through 2028, with 2026 being, I think, almost like the launch pad of wherever we're going by the end of 2026. It'll be hard to change directions by then. Now, having said that, I think that it's important for each of us individually to maintain a perspective that goes beyond the awful, difficult complexity of suffering and fear and uncertainty that we are all sharing. And I say we are all sharing. It's pretty much anyone, anywhere on the planet, regardless of what your political affiliation is, what your economic condition is, what your ethnic background is, what your individual situation is. There is uncertainty and fear pretty much at every level. It's something that we as a collective consciousness are sharing at this point in time. It's also important to understand that when things change quickly, these fears are often well grounded. However, at this point in time, I think these fears are being purposefully fed to us so that we become distracted and think that we need to fear someone else rather than fearing either the larger changes or the or those who are preventing those changes from unfolding. I think that it's important to keep in mind that as we move through the end of January, and the events will continue to get more and more intense, I don't want to just give them permission and say, well, and that's okay. But that's okay. Not only is it okay, it's actually part of a larger scenario because we are individually and collectively being moved to a point where we realize we can't go back. And I think that's a lot of what's unfolding in January is this idea that ready or not, we're moving into the future and that we have to figure out ways to make it work, not figuring out ways to make what we thought was a valuable or what's the word I'm looking for, an effective solution. Those things that were effective solutions last year or 20 years ago or 50 years ago are not what's important today. And unfortunately, many people, regardless of what political spectrum on any issue you are on, many of us still hold on to this idea that we can go back to some old position. The thing is that everything is changing, and part of the importance of why so much is changing so fast is that we need to realize that we as humans live on an island. this island Earth is a little tiny place, and we're either going to figure out a way to get along and make it work for all of us, or we're going to be in trouble. And and I have to say that although I am not a Pollyanna optimist that everything's just going to be okay always, no matter what's going on, I do believe that the astrology of these times, although it shows the complexity and the intensity of the clash between the old and the new, between the status quo and what's around the bend, between the safety of feeling like we live in a contained world versus the reality of realizing that our universe, our cosmos, is way larger and more complex than it ever was in the past, than we ever thought it was. And that we're all facing these concerns. Now, having said that, I think it's important to understand that the astrology of these times, leading into the first of the successive trines between Uranus, the planet of sudden change, shock, revolution, awe, surprise, Uranus, the quantum planet of the unexpected, is harmonizing for the first time exactly in July with Pluto, the planet that is sometimes called the planet of death and rebirth. Now, we have to acknowledge that this is not necessarily, in fact, it's not specifically about physical death. It's about the death of an idea. It's about letting something go so that we can have a new thing be reborn. It's about the caterpillar having to quote unquote die, but it doesn't really. It's just transformed into a butterfly. Humanity is at that point where we will either open up the chrysalis too soon and perhaps die, or we will be transformed into some sort of new form of consciousness that's around the bend that we don't have any real specific idea of how we will adapt or how we will move into that, which is part of why people seem to be afraid. There's a lot of people who just want to go back to the way it was, except we can't. That's the bottom line. So as we approach the February alignment of Saturn and Neptune, which occurs for the first, well, which occurs exactly on February 20th. And many people are pointing to that date as being like the most significant date of 2026. I disagree. I think it's an important threshold that we are moving through, but we've had tastes of the threshold of the Saturn Neptune event and the Uranus Pluto trine, two separate events, and yet they're completely interrelated because the Saturn Neptune conjunction is occurring at the midpoint between Uranus and Pluto. And let's actually now bring up the chart for January 15th and kind of move in through the rest of the month, understanding that the next couple of weeks are still leading up to that which will unfold in February, which is going to be very significant and important, but more than anything, plant seeds that will then begin to unfold and won't flower for the first flowering or the first fruiting, perhaps, until June, July, August of 2026, and then will, in fact, rebloom on several levels through 2028. And we'll visit the wider spectrum of this at a future time. But right now, let's bring up the chart for January 15th. Now, the chart that we are looking at is a chart for January 15th at noon, and this is for Pacific Standard Time. That's the west coast of the United States. But this chart is accurate once you adjust it for your time zone. This is 8 hours earlier than Greenwich Mean Time. So if you're in London, then this is a chart for 8 p.m. on the same day on January 15th. And if you're in New York City, for example, East Coast is 3 hours later. It's a chart for 3 p.m. This chart is called an Aries rising chart, and that is because the rising sign is the horizon, and the horizon, the eastern and western horizons, are determined by where you are on the planet. So we have no houses in this chart. It's simply the signs going around, starting with Aries. And as we look at this chart, we can see that Saturn and Neptune are at the latter degrees of Pisces, that Neptune is at 29 degrees 45 minutes. It's like a clock. 45 minutes is 1/4 to the next hour or 3/4 after. So this is 29 and 3/4 of a degree. At 30 degrees, Neptune moves into Aries, and and that's significant because Neptune moves into Aries on January 26th. And Neptune lives in each sign for about 14 years. Neptune touched into Aries last spring and was in Aries for a few months, backed into Pisces again. And when it moves into Aries on January 26th, back into Aries, it stays there for 14 years. Meanwhile, Saturn, which had also tipped into Aries and backed into Pisces, retrograded back, Saturn won't move back into Aries until February. But then Saturn, moving faster than Neptune, will catch up to Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries on February 20th. And this is an event that astrologers all around the world are talking about. It's an event that I will certainly be revisiting, but Saturn, the planet of structure, of stability, Saturn, the planet of the three-dimensional world, what we sometimes refer to as reality, aligns with Neptune every 36 years. And Neptune is the planet of dreams and imagination. It's the place where reality melts into infinite potential and possibility. When Saturn and Neptune get together, on one hand, it can make us delusional and crazy because we think our dreams are real. And on the other hand, it can take those dreams and precipitate them into the three-dimensional world. And I think we're seeing this beginning to unfold in a number of ways already as we have a harder and harder time of knowing what's real and what's not. We see news clips with people that we know only to discover that it was an AI news clip and they didn't really say that. What is real? What is imagination? What is fact? What is fiction? On the other hand, we see the dreams of people kind of leaking through the restraints that are placed upon them, either by the curated reality of our educational or social systems. And we see those dreams becoming kind of growing out of their seams, almost like a balloon blowing up past the point at where it should pop, and it's not popping, but it's kind of getting larger and larger, and these dreams are growing more and more, and we can see those expanding by just listening to what people are saying around the planet and how we're stepping outside of the three-dimensional realms, whether we're thinking about intelligent life that comes from other star systems like the interstellar Three-Eye Atlas, or whether we're talking about governmental disclosure of ETs or consciousness that is not terrestrial, or whether we're considering things like whatever the consciousness is that creates crop circles or the increased communication that's happening in non-physical realms. For those of you who have listened to or know about the telepathy tapes, or people who are actually creating cyber worlds that are not based upon the internet and physical technology, but that there is a telepathic skill or level of perception that's coming back into wider and wider use, something maybe that all indigenous peoples had at one time that we've lost through our rationalization and narrowing our perceptions through the educational systems that we've had over the past centuries, even millennium. And but we're seeing these break down. We're seeing these break down also as we have more and more experiences with near-death experiences or past life experiences or people who communicate with non-physical entities. All of these are connected to this larger transition that's going on as Saturn and Neptune come together at the beginning of the zodiac at 0 degrees of Aries, but at the same time forming sextiles with Pluto on one side and with Uranus on the other. And here on January 15th, we can see that because of the retrograding Uranus, that Uranus and Pluto have now widened, even though they were within a quarter of a degree of being exactly trine over the summer and autumn of 2025. And we can see that Uranus and Pluto are now almost 5.5 degrees from being exactly trine, as Uranus has backed all the way up to 27.5 degrees of Taurus after already tipping into Gemini, where Uranus is much freer to express its revolutionary and shocking intellectual kind of awakenings. But as Uranus will turn direct, it gains speed very quickly and it closes in on that trine to Pluto by July. Actually, July 20th is the July 19th, I think, is the first exact trine of Uranus and Pluto. And there will be five of them that Uranus and Pluto trine. Yeah, it's exact for the first time on July 17, but it will move in and out of exactness, and its fifth and final time will be on May 9th of 2028. So it's going to really take several years for this energy to unfold. And yet, right now, we're kind of in the midst of an apparent breakdown of what's going on. And I talked a lot about this at the beginning, at the January forecast, because we were talking about how all those planets in Capricorn, and that all those planets being Venus, the Sun, Mars, and Mercury, all moving through Capricorn, had all moved opposite Jupiter, making things even bigger and overblown and overextending beyond what we ever thought would be possible. And then those planets moving into squares with Chiron and Eris that are themselves coming back into their third and final conjunction by March, which is a whole meeting of Eris, the sower of discord and disruption, but not to mess things up, but to see what doesn't fit in so it can be reintegrated at a higher level. And Eris being joined by Chiron, Chiron, the first mentor, the first teacher, Chiron, the bringer of the healing arts to Asclepius and the martial arts to Hercules, Chiron, the wounded healer. And in some ways, these wounds are coming out, and with Venus and the Sun and Mars and Mercury all making those squares to Chiron and Eris, we're feeling this conflict. We're feeling this engagement between the structure, the Capricornian hierarchical stability structure, and the Chiron and Eris and Aries, and the need to go into new places to resolve this energy. Now, all of these planets that I mentioned in Capricorn are now, over the last few days and the next few days, will all be making their squares to Chiron, the Venus squared Chiron on January 11th, and the Sun squared Chiron on the 12th, and then Mars squared Chiron on the 13th, and today at 10:20 p.m., again, all times that I mentioned will be Pacific time, Mercury will square Chiron. Now, all these planets squaring Chiron are all bringing up conflict around the potential to heal. With the Mercury today squaring Chiron, the words are assertive and aggressive and stated as fact, because Mercury in Capricorn only states things the way they are or the way they think they are, but they're squaring Chiron. And then each of those same planets either have already or will square Eris. Venus squared Eris back on the evening of January 12th, and then the Sun squared Eris on the 14th, and now Mars is coming into squaring Eris on the 16th. That'll be tomorrow on Friday. And then Mercury, moving faster though, will come in and square Eris on the 17th. And as each of these planets square Eris, in the midst of everything else that's going on, they're stirring up more disruption, more disorder, creating ruckuses here and there and everywhere. And this is part of what's feeding all of this energy. And also in the background, we have Jupiter having already squared Chiron and Eris, retrograded back through those squares, and it will eventually turn direct and move direct and make those squares again to Chiron and Eris through the latter part of winter and into the spring. And this is something that we will be following. But these squares, or this T square, this cardinal T square, these are the cardinal signs because they're the season starting signs. Chiron and Eris in Aries. Aries is the beginning of spring in the northern hemisphere. Jupiter in Cancer. Cancer is the beginning of summer. And then we have Mercury, Mars, the Sun, and Venus in Capricorn, which is the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere. And that's the winter sign. And we note here on the 15th, we also have the moon in Sagittarius, and that moon will be moving into Capricorn and moving toward a new moon that we'll get to in just a moment, because this is going to be a dynamic and powerful statement for what will unfold in the weeks ahead. Now, as each of these planets move through the latter degrees of Capricorn, they are also making sextiles with Saturn and trines with Uranus, which is stabilizing, that's the Saturn, some of this energy, or giving us the opportunity to stabilize the energy. And as they trine Uranus, this is a change, but it's change that happens smoothly. Now, here at the beginning of the second half of the month on January 15th, Saturn is less than a half a degree away from sextiling Uranus. And in fact, that Saturn sextile to Uranus will be exact on January 19th. And Saturn sextiling Uranus is in some ways a statement of the old and the new actually interacting, that there is actually a flow of energy, or let me put it this way, there's an opportunity for communication or for flow of energy, as Saturn wants to hold on to the stable, wants to hold on to the past, wants to make the status quo safe. And yet Uranus wants to push into the future. Uranus wants to disrupt the things that are holding us back from progress, from change. And as this becomes exact over the days ahead, we may see some movement here. But at the same time, the Venus, Sun, Mars, and Mercury are sextiling Saturn. And as they sextile Saturn, and again, the scenario here is that Venus leads the pack. It sextiled Saturn yesterday on Wednesday. And whenever I refer to a yesterday, today, or tomorrow, it's always in reference to the chart that we're looking at. But Venus sextiled Saturn yesterday. The Sun sextiles Saturn tomorrow, the day after tomorrow at the new moon, and that's very important, and we'll get to that again in just a moment. But then Mercury sextiles Saturn on the 18th. The Sun sextiles Saturn on the 17th. And then Mars comes in and sextiles Saturn on the 19th. Now, these sextiles are all stabilizing in the midst of all of this kind of chaos and disruption. And then at the same time, we have Venus also, as it's sextiling Saturn, is also going to be is also going to be trining Uranus. The difference between a sextile and a trine is that both of them indicate the potential of energy flowing. But the sextile takes an effort. It's an opportunity. There's cooperation, but something has to be done to take advantage of that. Whereas the trines between these Capricorn planets and Uranus is the energy flows, whether we think about it or not. And the Venus, again, leading the pack, trining Uranus on the 15th in the morning is about a flow of what we like and what we want, the beauty, the attachment to nice things that to Uranus are disruptive, are turning things upside down. There's that sense of shock of and the unexpected of Uranus. And then the sun makes that trine to Uranus on the 17th. And again, this will be tied to the new moon, but it's exact on the 17th. And again, the new is breaking through, Mercury moving behind the sun, but catching up to it. Actually, on the 18th, will make its trine to Uranus. And now the languaging, the words, the communication is so disruptive and so crazy. I don't say crazy. It's unexpected. It's not. It's moving past what it should or shouldn't say. That's the sextile to Saturn. Now somehow it's saying it, and it's actually breaking through into new territory. And then by the 19th, Saturn makes that exact sextile to Uranus that I mentioned earlier on the same day that Mars is actually sextiling Saturn and trining Uranus. That's on the 19th, which I think is an incredibly potent and powerful day. Now, remember, each of these planets will move into Aquarius in the same order that they've been in, although Mercury is moving so quickly, it catches up and goes past Mars before they all change signs. But Venus actually changes signs, and Venus moves into Aquarius on the 17th, just prior to the new moon, which is on the 18th. The sun will move into Aquarius on Monday, actually Monday late afternoon, just before 6 o'clock. We'll see that on the chart of January 19th. And then after the sun moves into Aquarius, Mercury moves into Aquarius, having overtaken Mars. And Mercury moves into Aquarius on January 20th, and then Mars will move into Aquarius on January 23rd. Why is all this important? Why are we talking about it now? Because as we do the day by day, you'll see that as each of these planets move into Aquarius, one by one, they're going to each come into range of conjoining Pluto as they move into Aquarius, and then they will each conjoin Pluto one at a time. And we will look at that because this is when the next layer of action is going to unfold, when more secrets will be uncovered, more things are going to come out into the open. And again, I just want to reiterate, if you think that we've seen a lot of stuff going on between in the new year, between January 1st and the 15th, buckle up, hold on to your hats, do whatever you need to do, because we're on a bit of a cosmic roller coaster ride. The moon actually shifts into Capricorn on the morning of Friday, January 16th. And so if we move this chart ahead one day, we can see that by noon, the moon is at 4 degrees of Capricorn. And this is important because we now have the sun and the moon and Mercury and Venus and Mars, the luminaries, the sun and the moon, and all the personal planets, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, all in Capricorn. This is quite sobering. This is quite reality checking. This, in a way, emphasizes the planet Saturn, because Saturn is the ruler or the guide or the planet that's at home in Capricorn. In fact, in traditional astrology, Saturn is at home both in Capricorn and Aquarius. And so we're going to get a flavor of Saturn even as these planets move from Capricorn into Aquarius. And especially because in Aquarius, they're going to be picking up also on the energy to Uranus. So what we have here on the 16th is that Mars is now making the exact square to Eris. I mentioned this earlier. And again, this can be quite disruptive. This is energy. This is assertion. This is aggression. This is, the United States declaring that it's going to take over Greenland no matter what. I mean, I know that's already been said and stated, but it's that kind of energy that's building. We may see these same words from other countries or even actions now that are supported disrupted by the Mars square to Eris, and we see the physical military disruption that may come in, especially as Mercury is still coming in behind this, that the Mercury square isn't until tomorrow, the 17th. But here on the 16th, we also have Mars making a half square with the nodal axis. The nodal axis, the nodes are in Pisces and Virgo, and this whole thing is unfolding with these planets making these hard aspects with the nodes that I think are something that we shouldn't just pass off. I think I mentioned in the monthly forecast that the fact was that Eris was also making a half square and square and a half with the nodal points, and that in itself was also feeding the energy. The Eris square, half square, and square and a half occurs on January 17th. And so that's right here in the mix because as Mars is squaring Eris, halfway between Mars and Eris is the North Node at 9, almost 10 degrees of Pisces. And so this energy is being set up that is incredibly disruptive. Now, as we move to the 17th, we can see here on the 17th that midday the moon is mid Capricorn opposing Jupiter, and the moon is coming in through all of its hard aspects to Jupiter and Chiron and Eris this afternoon and tonight and even into the early hours of tomorrow. But here on the 17th, we have the sun making its exact sextile with Saturn. And that occurs early morning hours. We can see that the sun is making its exact trine with Uranus, and that's happening also morning, just before 9 a.m. There's a lot going on early hours today. Mercury's making the exact square to Eris. Mercury is also making its exact semi-square to the North Node. That's the semi-square, half square, and square and a half to the nodal axis. We also have Venus having just slipped into Aquarius, which can loosen the energy a bit, but it also brings our desires and our hopes and our wants a little bit further into the future. And Venus, although it's still at noon today, 3 degrees away from its conjunction to Pluto, we're now getting the sense of we're back in the underworld. There's something has to go. There's death, destruction, ending, letting go of, disintegration of. There's something that has to be set aside. Strings have to be cut. Things have to be put in the past in order for us to move into the future. And I think that as each of the planets actually make their exact conjunctions with Pluto over the days ahead, and that will actually unfold with Venus making its exact conjunction with Pluto on January 19th. Mercury now moving faster, having taken over past the sun. Mercury will make its exact conjunction with Pluto on the 22nd. The sun will make its exact conjunction with Pluto on the 23rd, and then Mars, moving a bit slower, will make its exact conjunction with Pluto on the 27th. Now, in each of these dates, there will be something that will be touching off in and around the day before, day of, day after, where the planets will take their step into the hell realms. And again, we have to be careful. The hell realms are not bad. They're not a place where we go to get punished. The hell realms are the place where transformation and magic happens. It's where that which dies becomes the seeds of that which are reborn. You've probably heard me say this before, but I love to quote William Blake, who wanted on his gravestone, William Blake, born 1757, died many times since. Death is part of a process of rebirth and growth. But here on the 17th, we have a whole lot of stuff going on. And we also have Mercury catching up to Mars on the 17th. And that's later in the evening, just before midnight at 11:40 p.m. And in a way, this is our languaging, our words are now feeding into that whole Martian assertiveness, aggressiveness. I think things can really get out of hand here on the 17th and 18th, especially as we move to the 18th and to the new moon. We can see here that at the new moon actually occurs at 11:51, and that occurs with both the sun and the moon at 28 degrees and 44 minutes of Capricorn. Now, why this is such an intense and such a powerful new moon is because this new moon is so closely trine to Uranus and so closely sextile to Saturn and Neptune. In fact, if we were to take the midpoint of Saturn and Neptune, midpoints are like real points, and the midpoint between Saturn and Neptune is 28 degrees and 38 minutes of Pisces. Now, remember, the new moon is at 28 degrees and 44 minutes of Capricorn. So this means that the difference between this new moon and the point at which Saturn and Neptune are working together, their midpoint, their the place where their energy acts as one, if you will, is like 1/10 of a degree from being exact. And on top of that, with Uranus so close into the mixture also, this new moon is crazy intense, crazy profound. It's one of the most important new moons that I've ever seen. And let's talk about what that new moon means. For all practical purposes, new moons are the beginning of a cycle. In fact, whenever any planet lines up with another planet, that begins that planetary cycle's unfolding. And of course, the moon catching up with the sun once a month is the most regular of these cycles. But this new moon has all the personal planets right in the mix because we've just had Venus come across the sun. And in fact, the moon will come across Venus. We've just had, we will have Mercury catch up with the sun and Mars catch up with the sun. And so we're seeing all of this density around the seed that's being planted. What is the seed? The seed is a planting of that which is real, that which is developmental, that which has a goal, that which is aiming toward reaching a summit, that which has structure and stability. And yet that whole piece is tied to the dissolution of the structure. That's the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and tied to the breaking through and the ingenious awakening that occurs with the trines to Uranus. And so this is just, I think, one of the most powerful new moons that I've seen in quite a while. This on the 18th, and again the exact trine between Mercury and Uranus is also today, later in the evening at about 9:37 p.m. And the sextile between Mercury and Saturn is also later this evening at about 8 o'clock, 8:08 p.m. But in a way, we have Mercury as a key player here because Mercury is also catching up with the sun. It won't do that because the sun and Mercury are kind of moving at similar speeds right now, but Mercury will catch up to the sun on the 21st. But right now we have that Mercury playing an important role in this new moon also because of its trines and sextiles to Saturn and Uranus. And of course, it will then also sextile the Saturn-Neptune midpoint, and then it will, after that, it will then sextile Neptune, and it does that also by tomorrow. So things are really unfolding here quite quickly. As we move to the 19th, we can see now that the moon is in Aquarius. In fact, the moon moved into Aquarius on the 18th afternoon after the chart that we looked at 2:17 p.m. And we can also see that Venus is edging closer to its conjunction with Pluto. But we are getting this flavor now of the Aquarian energy pulling us into a new relationship with community, into a new relationship with authority, into a new relationship with the future, in fact. And as we move into the 19th, we can see that also the sun at noon is at 29 degrees and 45 minutes of Capricorn, which means that the sun will move into Aquarius at just before 6 p.m. at 5:45 p.m. The sun will move into Aquarius. But the sun now is also sextiling Neptune. And we also have later today Venus catching up to Pluto, which I talked about earlier. We're not interested in the lightweight now. We want to get to the nitty gritty. Venus and Pluto wants to deal with the darkness so that it can unfold it and even turn it into light. And also today we have the third and final exact sextile between the planet of old Saturn and the planet of new Uranus. Again, the new moon is feeding into all this energy, and with Mars at the same time making its trine to Uranus as Saturn is sextiling Uranus and Mars is sextiling Saturn, this triangle here between Saturn, Uranus, and Mars is very important because in some ways it is almost like the last hold of this old Earth and water stability that we're coming out of with planets in Capricorn and planets in Taurus and planets in Pisces. And remember, all the planets in Capricorn are moving into Aquarius to catch up with Pluto. That is going to stay there for, the next decade and a half or so. And Saturn and Neptune that are in Pisces are inching into Aries. Saturn doesn't move into Aries until February, but remember, Neptune is actually moving into Aries just in a few days on the 26th. So we're getting the last hold of the Capricorn, Pisces, and Taurus as the planets from Capricorn move into Aquarius, the planets from Pisces move into Aries, and Uranus, that's still retrograde in Taurus, will turn direct and then move into Gemini. This is a larger sweep of events that I think is incredibly important. As we move to Tuesday, the 20th, we now have the exact sextile with Mercury and Neptune, just as Mercury also moves into Aquarius this morning at just before 9 o'clock at 8:40 a.m. And the moon having kind of passed through most of Aquarius, the moon will move from Aquarius into Pisces this evening or tonight at 10:49 p.m. And this is now setting up the larger sweep of all these planets that next month will move from Aquarius into Pisces. But as we move this to the Wednesday, the 21st, we can see that there's a little bit of a lineup here in Pisces now with the moon coming up towards the nodal axis. And of course, Saturn and Neptune are still in Pisces. Neptune is only in Pisces for another 5 days. And as Neptune moves back into Aries, we're going to feel another wave of unconscious push into the new realms of what lay around the corner, as if there's really a corner around the bend, I think may be a better way of saying it. But we also have today Mercury catching up with the sun. There's a cazimi. The Mercury goes into the heart of the sun. This is very powerful for communication, but it's occurring in Aquarius. We now have 4 planets in Aquarius. Mars is still lingering behind in Capricorn, giving us a little bit of a hold on the past. But as Mars moves into Aquarius on the 23rd, we're going to feel another wave of we can't go back into the past. At least that's what I think we're seeing unfold here. Let's move this ahead another day to Thursday, the 22nd. We can see now that the moon is in mid Pisces. In fact, we have the moon mid-morning today making a trine with Jupiter. This may take a little bit of pressure off of things, or it might just say, all right, let's push things even too far again, because remember, Jupiter is the planet of too much, or sometimes more than we need. Here on the 22nd, Mercury, now having moved into Aquarius, is now joined up with Pluto. And again, I think we're going to see another wave of disclosure over things that we thought we already knew, things that were already out in the open. Mercury on Pluto is another whole layer of very deep power struggle, trying to maintain who's in control of the definition of what's real. And at the same time, we have Mars making its sextile with Neptune today before it changes signs, moving into Aquarius tomorrow. Again, I think there's a lot going on, but it's hard to tell what we know versus what we don't know. And then by noon on January 23rd, we have the moon moving into Aries early this morning at 5:25 a.m. This is Friday, January 23rd. But we now see by noon that we now have Mars in Aquarius. So we have this veritable conjunction having moved from Capricorn into Aquarius, where we have within 7 degrees, well, really within 8 degrees, we have Mars, Pluto, Sun, Mercury, and Venus all now in the sign of community, new relationships among equality. But we have to remember that there is often a loss of identity in Aquarius because Aquarius's greatest fear is being subsumed into the identity of the collective, yet it's also its greatest desire. I sometimes think that we've seen a lot of people talking about Pluto's movement through Aquarius as being a new age of brotherhood, the humanitarian, the community, the collective consciousness. All of this is true. But remember, this collective consciousness is also the consciousness of a beehive or a termite colony or an ant colony, or going back to Star Trek, Borg. There's this sense of there is no I, it's a we. Who are you? We are Borg, and we shall assimilate you. Resistance is futile. And so we have these planets now in Aquarius, and which way this goes really depends upon the actions of individuals and how we maintain what is truth and what is important to us. We also have here on the 23rd, the sun now catching up to Pluto. The sun's conjunction with Pluto is early morning hours at about 2:28 a.m. And Mars actually has moved into Aquarius just after midnight this morning at 1:16 a.m. But this is all like New World stuff. The moon now in Aries. The moon moving into Aries just prior to Neptune moving into Aries in just a few days now. It's almost like the moon is giving, it's pulling us into the future and giving us a gut feeling of like what's to come. And as we move this chart ahead to the 24th, we can see that Neptune now is at 29 degrees of Pisces in 57 minutes. It's like 1/20th of a degree away from being in Aries. And it's like things have changed. This is no longer the world that we thought we knew. We also have Mars getting closer and closer to Pluto. Mars-Pluto conjunctions can be quite disruptive. Again, they're often about deep power struggles that I think have been unfolding, whether it's the political power structures of the United States against Europe, or the United States and Russia, or whether it's Russia and Ukraine, or whether it's China and the United States, or China and Taiwan, or whether it's North Korea and South. I mean, there's so many inflection points here, whether it's Greenland and the United States, whether it's Venezuela and other countries that are being locked out of trading with Venezuela. It's complicated. But the bottom line here is that things have changed. And we can see here that also on the 24th, the moon moving through mid-Aries midday on the 24th is going to square Jupiter. That may stir up a little bit of energy also, again, as things become too much. And as the moon in the mid-afternoon on and through the evening, the moon not only will square Jupiter, but also conjoin Chiron and Eris. And I think that, again, is a proactive point here. And then as we move to the 25th, we now see Neptune is at 29 degrees and 59 minutes. It's 1/60th of a degree away from being in Aries. Oh man, it's all unfolding. The moon now has moved into Taurus. It does that. I should say, it does that on Sunday at 10 a.m. It's actually 10:05 a.m. But here at noon, we can see that the moon is at 1 degree of Taurus. That's significant because the moon in early degrees of Taurus, as the moon moves into Taurus, it will square Mars and square Pluto. As Mars is now moving into its conjunction with Pluto, it's about 1.5 degrees away from that. And that, of course, that Mars Pluto conjunction will be exact in just a couple of days on Tuesday, the 27th. And so this is unstable and not comfortable, and yet there is real potential stuff unfolding here. And again, we have to pay attention to what's going on while not getting so attached to what's going on as being the final game. This is all part of a larger process. And as much as I hate using the word collateral damage, often when we go someplace that is positive, there is some difficulty and some suffering along the way. This is not to make it okay. This is not to make it light. When there is suffering, suffering is suffering. But I can see as we move as we move through the end of January, we might have to face some of this potential damage that may be unfolding as we move through this period of time. But I think it's really important that we hold on to what we know can occur on the far end of this, because I do believe that this phase will, in fact, settle down. But this is rock and roll period of time, January 25th. As we move to the 26th, we now see for the first time Neptune in Aries. It will not retrograde back into Pisces. Matter of fact, it will have to go around the entire zodiac. It'll be about 150 years. No, actually 160. Yeah, about 150 years before Neptune is back in Pisces. And so this is about the creativity and progenerative nature of imagination. This is about our dreams now moving into new territory. And of course, as Saturn in February moves into Aries and by the 20th catches up to Neptune, those dreams can in fact become real, or some of them can be set aside because they have to, because this is both about the realization of the dream and also about the disillusionment, meaning that where dreams don't become real, we have to deal with that also. This is all on the 26th. As we move to the 27th, the moon moves from Taurus into Gemini, which means that early in the day, here we're looking at the chart for noon, the moon doesn't move into Gemini until almost 1 o'clock, 1 p.m. at 12:54 p.m. But we can see that just about 4 hours ago, that the moon at about 8 a.m., the moon would have joined up with Uranus. And now as the moon moves through the latter degrees of Taurus, it will make a sextile with Saturn. And then at about 1 o'clock, again, what did I say? At 12:54 p.m., the moon will move into Gemini, and it will immediately make an exact sextile with Neptune. And then over the day ahead, over the hours and day ahead, 6 hours, 7 hours later, the moon will then make an exact trine to Mars and to Pluto, and then to the sun, and then to Mercury and Venus. So we're getting a flavor of movement here that I think is very strong. Now, the Mars conjunction to Pluto occurs at 3 p.m., so we're going to see some movement around that issue while the moon is making a trine to that. And we also have Venus making a half square with Saturn. As the planets move through the middle part of Aquarius, they will each, one at a time, make a half square to Saturn. Again, Venus is leading the pack. Mercury will make its half square to Saturn tomorrow. And then Mercury and Venus will both make their half squares to Neptune on the 29th. But it'll take until February before Mars move into those half squares. What do those half squares mean? It means that there's an engagement and a motivation to resolve the tension, to resolve the stress that is occurring from the Mercury and Venus in the futuristic Aquarius, the wanting to create new sense of community, with Saturn still holding back in Pisces, holding on to some of that old stuff. I think it's going to take until February, through the end of February and on into March, until we really see what's around this bend. This is on Tuesday, the 27th. On the 28th, not a lot of action, although we can see that the moon is in Gemini, making trines now with the Mercury and Venus in Aquarius. But the other thing here is that we have Mercury making its half square to Saturn. I mentioned that yesterday. This is just logic and thinking running into a wall and having to really buckle down and to deal with the facts, to deal with the truth. Although there, I think, is some conflict here. Then, as we move to the 29th, we have the moon moving from Gemini into Cancer. And again, it's just afternoon. So we see it at noon, still at 28.5 degrees of Gemini. The moon moves into Cancer at 2:31 p.m. And I think the important thing here on the 29th is that Mercury actually catches up with Venus. And this is a day in which we can communicate what it is that we want effectively, because the Mercury-Venus conjunction. We also have Mercury, though, then moving into a half square with Neptune and Venus following. And so as we communicate what we want, we have to be really clear that we're not just living off in the land of illusion, delusion, that we have to be really having some integrity about what our long-term wants and desires are. This is on the 29th. As we move to the 30th, we can see now that the moon in mid-Cancer by midday is about 8 hours away. So this evening, the moon will be conjoining Jupiter. And we also now can see that the planets in Aquarius, one by one, as they move through the 17 degree point, that they will be creating quincunxes with Jupiter, which is kind of an annoying, irritating, things don't fit in, don't feel right. What doesn't feel right? Well, today on the 30th, it's Mercury making that quincunx, and tomorrow it's Venus with Jupiter. And Jupiter is about the nurturing part of us that wants to have a protective, hard outer shell so that we can feel safe at home. Now, this may be individually, it may be familial, it may relate to our communities, our nations, but it also can be a global kind of a thing where we feel like in some way we have to protect what's ours, even though the vision of the larger future is requiring a breaking down, or is already broken down, some of those boundaries or barriers that we thought were making us safe. This doesn't feel comfortable, and there's no immediate resolution to it. But I do think that we have to keep in mind that all of this that's going on is all part of a larger process. As we end this month, we have the moon moving out of Cancer into Leo. It does that at about 4 o'clock, 4:08 p.m. on Saturday, the 31st. And we can see, though, now that all the planets are clear of their conjunctions to Pluto. And so I think that what's been revealed has been revealed. There's no going back here. And the fact that we have the moon in the latter degrees of Cancer making a trine with Saturn, picking up some stability before it changes signs later in the afternoon. And once the moon moves into Leo, we're going to get on February 1st a sense of the opposition between how we feel in our heart and where we want to express ourselves and what we're able to do based upon the social reality in which we live. So I think that this month is an absolutely intense and powerful, volatile month. Nothing that I've said today is different than what I said on the January forecast. It's just drilling down a bit deeper because we've seen the beginnings of how this is unfolding, and we can see this conflict between holding on to the past Saturn and the Neptune, the realizing of the dream, and the Uranus, the radical revolutionary awakening that is not repressible because of its looming trine with Pluto, which is feeding the evolution of humanity itself. That's it for now. As advice, I know I keep being asked, what do we do? And I think I'm pretty clear. And that is that paying attention is really important. This is not a time to go to sleep, but it's also not a time to step so far out on any limb based upon what we think we know is true, because things are in movement, that we will get to where we need to get to through dialogue and through opening our awareness. This doesn't mean just giving up on what we think is important and acknowledging that other people have a perspective too. But it does mean that finding those common grounds and finding the fact that we all want to live in a world that's safe. We all want to live in a world that in some ways supports the ability for individuals to be happy. And I think that right now it doesn't seem like that's the world we live in. It doesn't even seem like that's the world we're heading toward. But I do think that these times are catalytic, and our reactions to these things on a local level. Again, astrology allows us to think cosmically, but when we turn that into local action, local compassion, local kindness, local, what's the word I'm looking for? Empathy with those who are lost as we think about these big issues that we're going through. And they're huge. As we think about them, we can't lose sight of the individual suffering, the individuals who have had family loss or social loss or cultural loss. We can't forget about those who we've lost literally through physical death. And so it's really important that we find a way to balance the energy, the old and the new, as this continues to unfold. That's it for now. I'm Rick Levine. Think cosmically, act locally, and do what you can to share peace rather than fear.